Hey, everybody. Welcome to Crackpot, the podcast where each and every week we dive into a different conspiracy theory and we discuss the merits or the merits of each. We're your hosts. I'm Tim.
And I'm Zach.
How you doing, Zach?
You know what? I'm doing A-okay. And once again, dog days of September here. It's like 2,000 degrees in here.
Yeah, why is it 85 in late September?
And this is not even the same session that we recorded where we complained about how hot it was either.
Yeah.
So
in between there, it got down to like 60 for a couple days.
Yeah.
Then just
right back up.
Right back up.
Dude, let's go. So yeah, anyways, if I look like sweaty the video, if you go over to our YouTube channel, check out Crackpot Podcast. Rate, review, subscribe, follow. Smash that like button. And anyways, but if you see us and we look sweaty, it's because we're actually sweaty and it's really hot in
And we
here,
just ran 3 laps around the football field.
Yeah, it's our typical warm-up. So anyways, my friend, welcome back to the studio.
Thank you.
We're practically recording this puppy live.
Oh, yeah, which doesn't happen too often, but here we are.
So anyways, this is just about as close to a live recording as possible.
Yeah.
And folks, here's what I'll tell you. Today's topic is interesting for lots and lots of different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And we are talking about drugs, okay?
Oh. What kind? The fun kind or the not fun kind?
Well, let me begin by saying that drugs are bad.
Drugs are bad.
Don't do drugs, kiddos. But today what we're talking about is, well, we're talking about psychedelics.
Okay.
And this is endlessly fascinating to me because the book that I'm drawing from today, that I read recently, I would highly recommend it. It's called The Varieties of Psychedelic Experiences by Dr. Robert Masters and Dr. Gene Houston. But the reason why I'm talking about this today, even though it's not a literal conspiracy theory, is because you'll see through some of these stories that I'm drawing out from the book that, like, this is basically the greatest hits of everything that we've talked about. And what I mean by that is, okay, we've got people who experience like time dilation. We've got people that experience like basically NDEs.
Okay.
Talking to God, potentially ESP, telepathy. Like it's everything that's like really cool that we talk about.
Yes.
All happening within the confines of a psychedelic experience. So it's just weird.
It is weird, yeah.
And I will say, like, this show, I do not have a central thesis here.
Okay.
There's no big reveal. Half of this stuff, they still don't even understand what's going on. But that's precisely what I like about it. And you will hear themes. Like, I specifically chose anecdotal accounts and stories from this book that tie back almost one-to-one with some of the things that we've talked about in the show.
Fascinating.
And it could be anything from alien abductions to near-death experiences to you name it, man. That's why I liked it. So I read this book, and by the way, I highly recommend it. Check it out. It's just... It's a bunch of psychedelic experiences documented. Many of them were done in a laboratory setting.
Oh, wow.
So
yeah,
it's cool because they have, in most cases, guides that are helping the person go through the experience.
Uh-huh.
They're writing stuff down, they're measuring the dosage, and they're documenting this stuff. And like I said, there's no central thesis. And in fact, the book doesn't even have one either. It's just like, here you go.
Here's a bunch of drug trips. Yeah. What's up with that?
Yeah. But I think, to me, what I find really cool about this stuff is that there are some, I think, maybe primal or like, I don't know, consciousness type questions that come up. And you'll hear, a few themes in here that kind of come up, and it makes you wonder, okay, are we all wired the same way? Is that just how all of our brains work?
Right.
Is there something else going on? Because a lot of the times you can't really explain this stuff.
Yeah, it's weird. And like you said, it touches on consciousness. It touches on reality. It touches on the hereafter, I suppose.
Yeah.
It touches on all those things.
Or even history.
Oh, okay.
Which is also weird, too. You'll see what I'm talking about a bit.
The ironic part, and I feel like I should probably state this at the beginning if you don't, the irony is that the two of us have never...
We never dropped acid or done LSD is kind of the point here. So, yeah.
So it's a couple of middle-aged white nerds talking about drugs who have never done these drugs.
So, precisely, which is also what makes it even more interesting because you get to kind of peek behind the curtain, so to speak. Mm-hmm. This stuff is all crazy. This is just crazy stuff.
I love it. All right, well...
Yeah.
Wet my whistle. What are we talking about? Give me something good here.
Yeah, well, first of all, like I said, the book is called The Varieties of Psychedelic Experiences by Dr. Robert Masters, Dr. Gene Houston. The thing that I'll also say is that in this book, they cover a wide range of psychedelics, primarily LSD, but some peyote and some other ones mixed in there as well. So that's kind of cool. Some mushroom trips here too. But let's talk about what are some of the common themes, some of the common experiences, and just I guess what I'm trying to get out of this, Tim, is kind of your perspective on some of these themes, how they relate back to other things that we've talked about, completely unrelated to drugs. And just kind of stand in awe of like what's maybe going on here. So
I love it. All right.
Let's get rolling here. Not surprisingly, and by the way, I've structured this so it kind of starts out fairly typical and then gets into the like crazier experiences as we keep going.
Okay.
So this one is worth hanging in till the end because there's some legitimately weird stuff. Where I'm going with this is one of the first kind of themes that comes up when people are under the influence of psychedelics is this perception of time. And this is, okay, we have a couple of things that typically come up, and I'll read, what people have experienced, but there are some oddities and some really bizarre situations that also come up as it relates to time. But one of the key themes as it relates back to psychedelics, and this could be really any form of a psychedelic, is that people have experiences that sometimes feel like they last for years or for many hours or even sometimes like entire lifetimes, when in fact only a few seconds have passed.
That's terrifying. All of this is terrifying to me. I just want to get that out on the table here. Are you going to be talking about salvia at all?
Not in this show.
Okay, because salvia, again, it goes without saying, never done any of these things, but salvia is one where, like, the trip itself, I've read, lasts, like, somewhere between 7 and 15 minutes, but you feel and experience a lifetime, a literal lifetime. And these people come out of it and they almost sometimes mourn the family and the life and the career or whatever it is that they leave behind from the trip. So it's like, how does our brain make 15 minutes into like 100 years? Explain that to me.
This is something that apparently like nobody can actually explain. And the question is, okay, is the brain processing more and more information at a faster rate?
Oh.
Or is it something like we don't know?
Okay. Yeah, what does control our sense of time?
Another key question.
Okay.
Right?
All right. Sorry. I interrupted. Please continue.
All right. So they have documented experiences of people who, like I said, they'll experience something. One example here from the book was a person who felt like they were being coronated as a king. They were also smoking a cigarette at the same time, and after they went through the entire coronation ceremony, they realized that the cigarette was barely even like drawn from.
Oh my God.
So they had that kind of a thing. The feeling of, in a drug trip, let's just say, feeling like walking down flights of stairs literally takes forever.
Oh, wow.
The guide, the person sitting there through the drug experience, will step away for 10 seconds, right, to get a glass of water and come back. And the subject undergoing the drug experience is going, why did you leave for so long?
Oh, my gosh.
It's really weird. So time distortion is a real thing that occurs. One of the other things that is just beyond weird to me is this time distortion. What sometimes can happen, and this happens under laboratory settings, is the subject will experience or know events before they happen. In other words, basically like a deja vu situation.
Before it happens.
Yeah.
That is so weird. And not to discount that, but I have to wonder if it does actually occur out of order or if they just think it occurs out of order. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's what's hard, is they can't always tell if it's just the memory. So, subsequently, the memory just kind of putting it back together in the wrong order.
Yeah.
They experienced it real time.
Yeah.
Their brain just stitched it together in the wrong order kind of thing.
Let's be honest. They're on drugs. So,
Good point. There is also a theory. So, yeah, one thing could be, look, the brain just stitched it back together in the incorrect order. Another theory is that maybe there's a second consciousness. So you have...
What?
Yeah, so you have a consciousness that's experiencing things in the world around you real time, and then perhaps a second consciousness that perceives more meaningful events and that kind of a thing, and there's a mismatch between the two consciousnesses. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay,
they don't know
okay,
either.
all right.
But that's just kind of baseline. Like, okay, we all get it. You're under the influence of drugs. Time passes differently.
Yeah.
But what's really crazy is how people often really believe entire lifetimes have passed.
Yeah.
Days, weeks, months, and really just a few seconds have passed. So that's kind of one key theme. Another one here, and I'll draw out some specific examples, is this perception of self. And what this can mean is a couple of different things. One is simply that you're bigger or smaller than how you really are.
Are you, like physically bigger?
Physically.
Oh, okay. Because I thought you were going to go in the direction of like an ego death or something here.
No.
Which is the sense of self as it relates to psychedelics. But no, okay, sorry. So you could feel really big or really small, like Alice in Wonderland.
That was actually one of the examples.
Okay,
almost.
yeah.
So let me talk about this. So they said the altered body awareness results from a variety of triggering factors, so mood, ideation, perception of various external stimuli, along with inferred unconscious factors. So this is really cool, actually. A subject may experience his or her body as abnormally heavy because he or she's depressed, or begin to think of himself as being too fat because he's thinking weighty or heavy thoughts. So let me give you, and actually conversely then, you would say someone who maybe feels like they are more lightweight, if they're feeling cold or transparent, it could be because they're feeling like they're being observed, or they might have a big ego and they feel taller. It's just really bizarre. So let me get into a few examples of this.
Sure.
One of the first examples of this was from a subject, a 26-year-old male who was working as a clerk in a bookstore. He experienced shrinkage, and so he felt or believed himself to be 6 inches in height.
Oh, no.
He said the objects in the room underwent a similar and proportionate transformation, while the guide and another observer, so like scientists in the room, retained their normal dimensions, appearing to be giants to him.
You know what that reminds me? Do you remember that Steve Martin bit about getting small? He's like, let's get small.
Actually, I don't.
Okay. Well, it's very
Unfortunately.
funny. Trust me on this. Okay.
I believe you. So this is kind of funny. So this subject was actually taller than the people in the room with him, but as he was undergoing this drug trip, tilted his head back to look up at her, stating that he felt as David must have felt looking up at Goliath.
Man.
He said at one point the subject was given a box filled with miniature Japanese figures. He greeted these with expressions of delight, announcing they were more of his own size. Now listen to this. When the guide approached him, he seemed to shrivel and attempted to hide behind one of the figures, which was a little more than 1 inch high. Oh my God. Apparently he sat hand in hand with one of those figurines, the doll's hand being perhaps 1/8 of an inch in length, but he claimed the doll's hand completely filled up his own.
That's wild.
So,
okay.
But what's fascinating about this is you have both the actual, I guess, mental perception that you're smaller, but also the physical.
Yeah, it is bizarre. It is bizarre because, I mean, it goes without saying, we all have a sense of self. We all have a sense of awareness of our surroundings. And it is just bizarre that a slight chemical reaction in your brain can completely alter how tall you think you are, how much space you think you take up in this world.
And it correlates that feeling too. In this example, somebody feeling like their hand is holding another person's hand, like completely, when in fact it's just a doll's hand that's 1/8 of an inch. So
bizarre.
Who knows what's going on? Now this is one of the few times in the book where they talked about some like hypotheses around maybe what's driving this, and they were saying that perhaps in this situation, the individual felt like he was shrinking because he didn't really have complete control of his own life. And so he was saying that he felt like he was capable of much more at the time. You know, he was working kind of a part-time dead-end job, let's just say.
So they're taking this more of a Freudian kind of interpretation.
Yeah.
Like he shrinks because he feels small and inadequate, as opposed to like the LSD is affecting the part of his brain that gives us our shape and our size and our mass.
Yeah. So that's just kind of
okay.
weird.
I mean, who knows, right?
That's just it too, and it's actually one of the times in the book when they do speculate. A lot of the times it's just here's an account,
Sure,
and it's just weird. Okay, but this is one of those times where they think they might have some correlation there. Now, to contrast the shrinkage with being a giant, a different subject, another male. This was a man in his mid-30s. He became a giant, and like Alice, was afraid that the room would be unable to contain him.
Wow.
So he shared that his expanding body might crush the guide's body, and urged the guide to leave the room.
Man.
But this is also where it gets a little weird, and I think you can see where I'm kind of like tugging at some of the stuff that we've talked about previously. But listen to this. The experience lasted only a few minutes, okay? So the actual timed psychedelic experience. But during the experience, the subject described himself as engaged in an awesome, gigantic experience with other beings his own size. He was in a war of giants. He was very ancient and belonged to a breed of giants that walked the earth long ago.
Wow, the Nephilim.
Right. While experiencing his vision, he stood with eyes closed and arms folded, face serene and voice calm. He said, "These giants, they wore caveman-like garments fashioned from skins of animals, possibly mastodons. They fought with huge, gnarled clubs and with their hands in a strange style of wrestling." Once the subject picked up another giant and hurled him over the edge of a precipice. Whew. And he expressed uncertainty as to whether my people are fighting among themselves or we've been attacked by a hostile clan. He thought the scene of the conflict was possibly Ireland or Scotland, though it may have been in the south of the British Isles. Someplace in Europe. He said we had no calendar and thought only in terms of night and day, the waxing and waning of the moon, the changes in vegetation and the seasons. So this person is going through this whole lifetime experience of being a giant, fighting other giants in a clan.
Yeah, with a whole backstory and mythology and everything. Are these all LSD? I mean, do you remember what that person was taking?
This was LSD.
That was, okay.
Yep.
Man.
Huh?
I don't know. I have nothing to add to that. I really don't know.
And I don't blame you because I don't either, except for the fact that, we've talked about in the past on the show, the theories that maybe giants wandered the earth a long time ago.
Sure. And he maybe tapped into some sort of collective unconscious memory of that. And,
yeah.
Or a past lifetime, maybe.
Right. I mean, this is kind of where I'm going with this stuff. I don't know how on earth, like your brain would just suddenly like experience this lifetime of being a giant or whatever and fighting other giants and not concerning yourself with the calendar, just the moon.
Just the
seasons,
moon. The waxing and waning of the...
Yeah.
I mean, with psychedelics... They say that the two most important things are set and setting. So where you are and what's happening. And part of this, I mean, it's good that this was all done scientifically with, in controlled settings and so on and so forth, and clipboards and lab coats and all that stuff. But I have to wonder how much that actually affected the experience that these people were experiencing.
Well, what's interesting is in the book, they talked a bit about how important a guide is.
Okay.
And that the trip can experience, or the person experiencing the trip will really basically feed off of that experience with the guide. Okay. And if the guide takes them to places or tells them to do certain things, like they will do that. So it's, I mean, it sounds ridiculous to say this, but it's worth the investment in a good guide.
Right.
So,
okay. All right.
Let's keep rolling with some of these visuals because this is not about being a giant, not about being, Stuart Little, okay, if you will. This next one is just bizarre, and tell me what your thoughts are on this, okay? So one of the obvious effects of drugs on the brain here is people report seeing things, and one of the things could be simply that the floor starts to shift around, or the walls turn to waves, or whatever the case. And in some situations, you have full-blown lifetimes that get lived out. So Listen to this. There was no context required here. This was somebody sitting under the influence of peyote. So they said they would start to see images when they closed their eyes and perceived at first a succession of geometric forms, mostly circles and triangles. Colors were soft pastels. The first image I remember was of an Egyptian tomb made of granite, alabaster, and marble. Behind it, great golden sculptures of pharaohs rose to awesome heights, and there was the fragrance of eucalyptus burning in brass bowls mounted upon tripods of iron that had the feet of falcons. Funerary orations seemed to blend into marriage of ceremonies where fruit and great platters of meat, even the forbidden pig, were served up. From a distance after that, I saw pyramids and knew that one of these, this ceremony, was just unfolding. But the pyramids were transformed into haystacks, golden under the huge sun, and then became dunes in a great desert. Here, tents were clustered, half buried by stinging sands. There were tambourines, a drum, strange stringed instruments playing music I could hear and that seemed intended to lay bare and set, quivering the elemental passions of the listeners. So this person just observes what, a ritual in ancient Egypt in the middle of a desert?
Yeah.
And it's so detailed.
Vivid.
Incredibly vivid.
I mean, what the level of detail. It's almost comical. Like, holy smokes, how do you get all this out of that?
That is my question, and maybe that is the central theme. I know I said there wasn't really a thesis to this, but it's like, where does this come from?
Yeah.
Like, maybe you could say a repressed memory of watching, I don't know, a movie or something about ancient Egypt, or reading up on it in the past. I don't know, but it's just weird. Now, this other experience, and I'm bringing this up, and you'll see why in a second here, unrelated to the first experience, totally different person, and this was somebody on LSD, okay, so a different drug. This happened to be a 22-year-old male. Listen to this. He said, the experience did not begin badly. At first, there was a very strange sense that all perception and abstract cognition had become kinesthetic, that these were no more than extensions of one's neuromuscular being. Then came a profound sense of the tragic and comical aspects of life. He said, I closed my eyes, and at once there appeared to me great variety of Egyptian motifs. Statues and bas-reliefs, forms with rigorous symmetry. Everything was precise and geometrical. When I opened my eyes and looked at the objects around me, it was as if they were made of tallow and melting. But I just want to stop here for a sec. What's with ancient Egypt showing up in these different examples?
That is interesting. I haven't heard about ancient Egypt being a common theme or motif or anything like that. I mean, the geometric patterns that you mentioned a story or two ago, that seems to be pretty common. I don't know. Are you going to talk about ayahuasca much?
There weren't any accounts in this book.
Okay. So, yeah. I mean, people who take ayahuasca, regardless of where, I mean, you could do it in Oregon or you could do it in Peru, and people tend to see the same things, like vines and jungles and leopards seem to just come out of the woodwork, literally come out of the woodwork. So I don't really have anything more to say about it other than, like, do the drugs actually tap into the part of our brain that is responsible for these memories or these feelings or these visions, or something else? I don't know.
I'm glad you bring up the ayahuasca example, because it's bizarre and strange to me that two people under radically different settings could have almost the exact same or similar experiences.
Yeah.
And in fact, in keeping with this account, this gentleman said, I had several hallucinations that I recognized as such. At one point, elves appeared and accepted me as a jolly fellow spirit. They spoke to me in verse and wanted to guide me to magical places, castles, and mythological realms, many different personalities. So, that was another one of those where, hey, look.
Well, the elves sounds like DMT.
DMT.
And the machine elves, and Terence McKenna talked about these very famously, these little trickster, mischievous little gnome kind of things that just pop up and start talking to you. I've never heard of anyone having that happen with LSD, so that's interesting.
It is, yeah.
Like, do these little elves exist? And we just normally sober don't see them, can't hear them, can't tell where they are? But as soon as you add some chemicals to your brain, like, you're able to perceive them. I don't know. That's weird.
Dude, you could tell we've been doing this show for like 8 years because at this point we'll just talk about this stuff casually. Like, whatever. It could be.
Yeah, machine elves. Yeah, you know.
But I mean, really, that's it. And what I find utterly fascinating is the fact that, you have similar experiences.
Yes, yeah.
And people report the same things. So let's keep going. Another common theme across some of these psychedelic experiences is that of encountering gods or aliens.
Oh.
I liked this one a lot. So this was a college professor who was under the influence of LSD, and I'll tell you what he experienced. He said, "It was at that time that I closed my eyes and experienced a vision of the future that unfolded in vivid colors before my closed eyes. Was accompanied by voices that were audible, however, only inside my head. I found myself and the rest of mankind standing together on the foothills of the earth, being addressed by two splendid and luminous figures many hundreds of miles high. They could be seen plainly in spite of their height, and they told us that they were the elders of this particular part of the cosmos and had lost their patience with the human creatures of this earth. The recalcitrance of greedy, warring, barbarous mankind had overexceeded itself, and now that nuclear power had been discovered, the outrageous breed evolved on our planet might yet attempt to subvert the whole cosmos. And so it had been decided in the Council of Elders that unless mankind could find something in its creations with which to justify itself, it would have to be destroyed." Let's break that down a little bit.
That's wild.
Council of Elders. Right. But you know what? That whole concept also came up in, what was it? The OASP Bible?
Oh,
I mean, we've talked about something like that, right?
Yes.
Communing with, aliens essentially here, right? But let's keep going. Let me keep going here, and then you can react to this. So he said, "Having heard this message, we earthlings scattered and searched our libraries, museums, histories, and parliaments for some achievement that might be seen as justification for our being. We brought forth our greatest art objects, our Leonardos, Michelangelos, but the elders only shook their heads and said solemnly, 'It is not sufficient.' We brought forth our great masterpieces of literature, the works of Shakespeare, Milton, Goethe, Dante, but these were also deemed insufficient."
Wow.
But listen to this. So they brought forth even some of the religious figures, Jesus, Buddha, Moses, St. Francis. The elders laughed and said, "Not sufficient." It was then, when destruction seemed imminent and all had given up themselves and their fate, that I came forward and offered up the music of Johann Sebastian Bach.
Did Bach save mankind?
They listened to the entire corpus, and great silver tears of incredible brilliance shimmered and trickled down the length of their luminous bodies, after which they were silent. On this silence, which they broke only to say, "It is sufficient. You of the earth are justified," and they went away.
Wow.
Isn't that weird?
That is so bizarre.
Like, justify yourselves, mankind.
Justify yourselves because nuclear weapons are so heinous that we're going to wipe you out. I don't know, man. I mean, it's interesting, and it also probably is just some college professor working through their inner psyche, with some very fantastical and interesting imagery, but nevertheless,
hard to say.
Yeah.
Let's keep going here. Different individual also using LSD experienced something that I don't know. I want to get your take on this because this is really something else. So he said he experienced a powerful sense of the whole evolutionary process, and he viewed humankind. He viewed the evolutionary process as a snake, and he said something cuts across the evolutionary process. Something blasts into it, cuts it clean in two, changes its course. Had this not happened, man would have evolved into just another kind of animal. He experienced that vision with incredible detail. He said that if one is not to see man as only a machine, then one must recognize that alien force had blasted into the evolutionary sequence at a certain point and altered its course in the direction of a higher, more sophisticated process. He continued on to say that man possesses two distinct varieties of consciousness. One is the higher consciousness that came into being at the time when the alien blast cut through evolution. The other, primitive consciousness, had its origins much earlier and is capable of only feeling. The alien blast into matter initiated a process whereby the higher consciousness evolved along with but did not extinguish the lower primitive consciousness. The force that struck into the pre-established evolutionary animal pattern was God or spirit. The higher force burst in like a bullet. It imposed itself upon the creation of the other and created the material world. He then saw a series of images showing how it would have been without the infusion of spirit into matter. And he said that consciousness would have developed along continuous evolutionary lines. We would have been an entirely different animal in nature, and man would have been a creature entirely ruled by his appetites. So in other words, he experienced evolution and some sort of
divine intervention.
Yeah, interfering with what it was, creating man, bolting on consciousness with what was basically a human. Where does that come from? And why?
I don't know. I mean, okay. Well, it's important to remember that was LSD, right?
Correct. Yep.
It's important to remember LSD was invented in a lab in Switzerland. What,
1954?
Yeah, somewhere in that ballpark. Yeah. Albert Hoffman. I'm not saying this is what happened. However, that makes me that story. It sounds like an origin story. It sounds like a biblical, religious, mythological origin story of mankind. Almost, I mean, you could plop that into some 3,000, 4,000-year-old text, and I'd be like, yeah, that checks out. That makes sense. So that makes me wonder, did the people who wrote those, were they under the influence of a psychedelic? Obviously not LSD, because that wasn't invented until much later, but whether it's your psilocybin or your, I don't know, peyote.
Plant varieties,
Right.
Well, was it Robert P. Masters who wrote the book on the theory that religion was created by basically psychedelics, people using psychedelics?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, I'll do that in a future topic.
Sure. Yeah.
And basically that is the theory because they
the stoned ape theory?
Yeah. 100%.
Or, well, yeah, kind of.
It basically is because, they found traces of magic mushrooms in ancient glasses, that kind of a thing, wineskins, and perhaps people basically tripped, felt like they were experiencing the divine, wrote it down, and then
religions and cultures rose out of the ashes,
Isn't that wild?
Could be.
Yeah. We don't know. But, okay, I told you I was saving some of my favorite stuff for last year.
Yeah.
So let's talk about potentially some telepathy here and or astral projection and or something else.
This is all right. Now we're talking.
All right, and your guess is as good as mine. Some subjects have reported themselves being able to visit distant places. They brought back reports of what they saw. And some of the reports can be vague. Sometimes it's in much more detail. So they can kind of rule out, in some cases, lucky guesses. Okay, and you'll see by some examples here. But basically, people will be told to go to a house or an apartment by the guide, and then they'll go kind of rummage around in there and report what they find. Mm-hmm. So they're talking about potentially some traveling clairvoyance. And one of the first accounts of this is actually kind of a historical account first, was from 1927. There was a Dr. William McGovern. And he was exploring, I believe, the Amazon. And during the time, he took a native plant, and I don't even want to pronounce it. I believe it's called copy.
Okay.
That's like the short name of it. And he said, curiously enough, certain of the natives fell into a deep state of trance in which they possessed and appeared to have telepathic powers. 2 or 3 of the men described in detail what was going on hundreds of miles away, many of which were places they had never visited, and the inhabitants of which they had never seen, but which when he wrote down their details and went back to verify them, many of the places and peoples concerned were accurate. He said, more extraordinarily still, on this particular evening, the local medicine man told me the chief of a certain tribe in a faraway location had suddenly died. I entered this statement in my diary, and many weeks later, when we went to the tribe in question, I found out the witch doctor's statement had been true in every detail.
Wow.
So hundreds of miles away, didn't know that person, that tribe, anything about it.
Oh, my gosh.
This person died, and in fact, it was true.
Should we talk about astral projection? Should we
a
talk
little
about
bit.
remote viewing?
A little bit, yeah.
It is such a weird thing. We have a full episode on remote viewing, and I feel like it's something we should probably go back to.
We're going to go back. Yeah.
It appears to be real. Which I have to say laughing because, I don't know how to talk about this otherwise. But Dr. Monroe developed this method, and apparently you can listen to these tapes and practice and do this and actually be able to supposedly leave your body behind. Your consciousness travels miles, thousands, hundreds, and sees other things and is able to interact with other things, bring back information. I have not heard specifically this being done under the influence of any sort of hallucinogenic or psychedelic or anything like that, but it makes perfect sense to me. I mean, if one is true, why not the other?
And so one of the questions posed by the writers of this book is, perhaps whatever's happening with these psychedelics kind of opens up that possibility or makes it easier, I guess, if you will, to do astral projection or something like remote viewing, something like that.
I mean, here's the thing, man. It's like this. We are three-dimensional creatures who move one direction in time that have 5 senses. And that's it.
Right. That's it.
and even our sight, like there's so many more wavelengths of light that we cannot see. So we know there's more out there. We know there's frequencies we can't hear. We know that some animals can smell better than us, so on and so forth. And that's not even taking into account other potential senses that might or could exist. So maybe what these drugs are doing is like flipping a switch or turning on a part of our brain that allows us to experience things outside of our very rigid, very set, predetermined humanity.
Right.
And we don't know how to put it into words. We don't know how to. It's like, oh, it lasted forever. Oh, I traveled thousands of miles. It's like that doesn't make sense. But we're working within this framework that we're all familiar with.
Right.
So how do you explain something that is so out of the normal? I mean, how do you? So I don't know if I'm rambling or if that makes any sort of sense.
Well, this is why I struggled a lot with some of these accounts, because I just don't know what to do with them. But I've got 2 more related to this kind of astral projection, telepathy, if you will. And I mean, we're not going to come to any conclusions here, but it's just really interesting to hear about. There was another documented historical case from 1932. There was a Brazilian colonel named Morales who experienced some sort of clairvoyant properties of a drug called Yage, something like that. Mm-hmm. He was on a military mission up in the headwaters of eastern Peru and tried this plant, drank it. It produced on him an amazing effect, which seemed to dilate the normal consciousness. He said he heard music of an orchestra playing in what was apparently American surroundings. He said he also became conscious of the death of his sister in his house far away from where he was located at the time. So this house was about 3,000 miles away from this remote village. A month later, after the drug trip, a runner brought him a letter telling him that his sister had indeed died. And it was that same night.
Oh, wow. The thing is, we have heard so many accounts about that when people are just stone cold sober. You know?
Right. That's true.
So it's not a drug thing necessarily. It seems like it is just this other state of consciousness, this other state of being where you're able to tap into information that is not normally available.
Right.
And sometimes it's a vision, and sometimes it's a drug trip, and sometimes it's a ghost walking through the walls, and sometimes it's a beam of light from a alien spaceship. Like, I don't know, but like, I believe that. I believe that completely. That probably says more about me than it does about the story, but it doesn't surprise me.
No, me neither. And this last example won't surprise you either, though this was done under a lab setting, and for that reason I find it even more compelling. So there was a housewife in her mid-30s. She complained during the course of an LSD session that she could see her little girl in the kitchen of their home, and the daughter was taking advantage of her mother's absence to go looking for the cookie jar. The subject then reported that the daughter was standing on a chair, rummaging through the kitchen cabinets. The subject saw the child knock a glass sugar bowl from a shelf and remarked that the bowl had shattered on the floor, spilling sugar all around. So trip finishes up. She goes home, whatever. She decided to make herself some coffee. She couldn't find the sugar bowl. She asked her husband where it was, and he told her that while she was away, their daughter had made a mess, knocking the sugar bowl from the shelf and smashing it while the child was looking for cookies.
Again, I believe this completely. I do, because we have heard about people doing this. And I'm not going to say it's common. I'm not going to say it's normal, but it happens it happens enough that it's completely unsurprising to me.
And furthermore, I would say what she experienced in this was she saw it.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like this fabrication of, I don't know, ancient Egyptian pyramids or something. It's She saw it happen, and that maybe she did.
Yeah. No, I mean, maybe she did. It sounds like her description of seeing this happen is very similar to the people who do remote viewing, explaining what it's like when they, follow a person in a car or look in a room with a bunch of papers or something like that. It's like, yeah, they can see it. Like, that's the language they use. Yeah. And those people are able to bring back information. This woman brought back information. It seems to me like the LSD was able to just turn on or turn off a certain part of her brain that normally filters this sort of stuff out. And there you go. I don't know. But what's interesting is, I've read enough stories and, seen movies and all sorts of stuff. It doesn't seem like these are quote unquote normal LSD trips, right?
Typical or normal, or like, what do you mean?
Typical. I mean, to me, when I read a book on the Grateful Dead, it's like those guys are going out there and playing music in front of thousands of people every night, just completely dosed out of their what. And it's like they weren't time traveling. They weren't seeing 100-foot tall beings giving messages of humanity ending. They were probably seeing the sounds and feeling the color or something like that. It's like they were more dialed in or whatever the case. I don't know. It doesn't matter what Jerry Garcia was doing, but it doesn't sound like these. So I wonder, was it the guide that got them there? Was it specific circumstances in their life? Like, what was it? Why is it that sometimes the drug does ABC and sometimes the drug does XYZ?
It's a great question. I've wondered that too, and especially when you talk about musicians like that, where they're, hitting a flow state or something, but they're heavily dosed. It's like, what's going on there? With these accounts, I mean, I pulled out some examples of some common, I guess, effects and some similar themes across those with different people, different drugs, and I think, at the end of the day, we're still just kind of left scratching our heads.
Well, absolutely fascinating stuff. Like I said earlier in the show, we do have a remote viewing episode. We have an episode on the stoned ape theory, I think.
Not yet.
It's a Patreon. So if you're a Patreon member, you can find that. I'm just trying to think. We've got a bunch of DMT episodes. Yeah. So maybe we'll run one of those again real soon. Yeah. What was the name of the book again?
The Varieties of Psychedelic Experiences by Dr. Robert Masters and Dr. Gene Houston.
Check it out. And while you're checking that out, check out our Patreon.
Patreon.com/crackpotpodcast. $3, $5, $7 a month, you get access to our entire catalog, a weekly bonus show, and ad-free content. What else could you want?
What else? Literally, what else could you want? Anyway, guys, thank you so much for listening. And if you haven't already, please be sure to rate, review, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your local pharmacist about our podcast, and we will see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.